So my journey with height has been truly wild and unpredictable. Let's get into that. Hi guys, my name is Tozyro, and at just age 12, I was 5'10", which is obviously insane. It's very tall. And of course, with that being such an unusual thing, it was obviously noticed by people that I met, the new friends that I made. A good example is the day that I met this friend of mine for the first time. The first thing that she said to me was, "Why are you so tall?" Which I obviously didn't have the answer to, apart from maybe genetics, I guess. The second thing she asked me is, "Why do you sound like Optimus Prime?" And by the way, you can find all of these photos on my Instagram because I actually haven't deleted any photos like ever. So it's literally as soon as I made my Instagram, you can see everything there. So if you guys want to go over there and check all of it out, you know, see how I progressed in terms of like how I look and that kind of stuff. And if you want to give me a follow too. And of course, it would mean a lot to me if you guys could give a like and subscribe to the channel. I know that loads of channels ask for it, but it really, really does help out. So please consider doing that. And also at the end of the video, I'm going to be posting some comparison pictures with people that I've taken pictures next to when I was really young compared to more recently. So make sure you're looking out for those as well. Oh, and if you want to know how tall I am now, wait until the end of the video, right? Because you need to get the context, because the context is everything. The context makes it so much more interesting, you know. Just know the answer isn't good enough. That being said, I want you to take a minute to just go down to the comment section right now and type out what height you think that I am. Take a guess, and then let's see by the end if you're accurate at all. Don't skip to the end. So this shoot that I did with my band Beyond the Souls here, I would say is a very important and pivotal point to my height journey. This was the day in which all of us measured our heights, and I found out that I was 5'10", around that. It's also worth bearing in mind that my dad is 5'10.5", he's like 179, and my mum is 5'6.5", like 169 centimeters. And so they're tall, yeah, okay, they're tall, but they're not like way above average, you know what I mean? They're not like massive. But let's wind it back a little bit. So when I lived in Brazil, which was from when I was born until I was 9, I was very, very tall, but I was also the oldest in my class because of the way that the class system works over there. I ended up being the oldest in my year. So there I was, from a very young age, I was almost used to being the tallest, the oldest. So obviously that gave me the sense of, kind of like the sense of like power, the sense of authority, which was obviously something that I started to get used to because I was consistently like that. Like it never really changed, especially in Brazil. Obviously I did hang out with my neighbors who were older than me and therefore were taller than me, but that wasn't necessarily a school environment. The school was a lot different. I actually even remember getting into fights with people that were like 1 to 2 years older than me. And back then, 1 year makes such a huge difference. Like it's nothing compared to like today. Like the difference between a 17 and 18-year-old is nothing like the difference between someone who's 7 and 8 years old. That's like a completely different scenario. And yes, I'll put my hand up and I'll admit that I did get into quite a few fights in Brazil. Moving on, so when I was 9, almost 9, and I moved here to the UK and I started primary school here, which was from when I was 9 until I was 11, people were all of a sudden closer to me in terms of height. Now there's 2 reasons for that. Firstly, the average height of the UK population, of the English population, is taller than the average height of the Brazilian population. I don't know what that is, genetics again, but just to make that clear. And there was a second factor, and I think this factor was much more important, and that was that I went all of a sudden from being the oldest in the year to being one of the youngest. In fact, I might have even been the youngest because of how the years work in Brazil and the UK. They're different. They start in different times. So I ended up being the youngest. And although I was still the tallest, I was no longer the oldest, but obviously everyone was much closer in terms of my height. And I actually have a piece of paper here, which is when I measured my height on the 11th of August 2011, which means I had literally just turned 9. And my height at age 9, fresh age 9, was 4 feet, 9.3 inches, 1.46 centimeters. Now, I'm like way above average for that. And obviously my term in primary school, which was 9 to 11, I definitely remember by the end when I was like 10, I was taller than the teacher that I had. So I do presume that there was a big growth spurt from the age of 9 to the age of 10. And this is probably a very safe bet because when I was 10 and I went to Brazil, I remember my voice broke for the first time when I was on the way back from Brazil, age 10. So that's probably when I hit puberty. Because at that time, I wasn't really too bothered about height. It was just kind of like, yeah, whatever. You know, like most kids don't really care about height. To them, it's just kind of like, yeah, I'm tall or yeah, I'm short. They're not like, oh, my height is 1.46 centimeters. They just kind of do it. Okay, so we've done 9 and 10. Now let's just get to 11 before we get to the rest of the period. So when I was 11, I think it's safe to assume that that was, as I said, that was the point in which I had a really big growth spurt. As you can see from this photo here that I took with my mum, who is 5'6", we seem to be at about the same height, and do keep in mind that you can actually see that she's on her tiptoes. I was about 5'7" by that point, and that was when I was 11. So then what we have then is when I was 9. Not again. Why is it going back and forth? So what I was about to say before I got interrupted by the police for the third time was just a little quick checkup. So in August 2011, when I was 9, I was 4 feet 9.3 inches, which is 1.46 meters. And in April 2014, when I was 11, I was around 5'7", which is 1.7 meters. And just as an interesting point as well, when I was 9, I was about 6 inches above average. And when I was 11, I was over a foot taller than the average. Okay, now for the middle point, as I like to call it, when I was 12. So when I was 12 is when I hit 5 foot 10 inches. That day in which I had a photo shoot with my band, when we all measured our heights, is when I found out that I was 5 foot 10 inches. And the reason why that was such an important day for the journey of my height is that I realized that I was almost 5'11". That height, it sounds so good, 1.8 meters. And I was so proud that by that age, I managed to reach such a tall height. From that point onwards, height became something more important for me, because prior to that, the only thing which I really cared about, which I remember having a phase in which I was really interested in, was actually hair. Like looking at my mates' hair, when they had longer hair, seeing how they were parted and that kind of stuff. So like the next chapter to that was literally the height, when I realized that, this is something which is almost impressive about myself. So obviously, as that was the point in time in which I got so invested in my height, so interested in it, I naturally measured myself more. So I went to Boots, which is kind of like a pharmaceutical thing, and they have this little machine that measures your height. So I'm gonna read you guys what my measurements were at that point. So on September 2015, so I was already 13 and a couple of months by then. I expected myself to be basically on like a solid 5'11". Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. 5'10.4", I was 179. I was 1.79 m, as you can see here. And I remember I felt really bad at that point, because it was just like, now that I'm finally invested in heights, come on, let's get massive, let's get huge, let's get tall. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. I'd only grown, if anything, 1 centimeter, which is like half an inch at that point. Okay, so now moving on to the next one. So I did that one in September. Right afterwards, I did 3 in the space of 2 months. One of them, which I got 1.8 meters solidly. The other one in October as well, which I got 1.81. Within October, I was 5'11" / 5'11" in a bit, and that obviously felt great. I was like, so finally I'm getting some progress. And that obviously wouldn't last for too long, because the one that I did in December, I did it and I got 1.8 meters again. So I was shorter by 1 centimeter. Obviously I wasn't shorter, it was just the measurement. And what that was telling me was that that was a slow point for my growth. It was, I was sad, but this was the time in which I was really getting into height, and I think my mates kind of were too, but it was mostly me. And I remember like looking it up on the internet, and I was due to be 6'5". That was kind of like a slower time for my height. It's all right, it's not a problem, it's just a little bump in the road. And it's also worth mentioning that during this point in time, which is when I was 12 to 13, was the time when people really started catching up to my height. I had people that all of a sudden were here on me, being like, here on me. So then flash forward to when I was almost 14. This was over half a year later. This was on the 1st of June 2016. And when I got here was 182. 182? So you're telling me that half a year in a teenager's growth, in a 13-year-old's growth, and all that I get is barely a centimeter, barely half an inch. I saw this and I was like, why? Why is this? Why am I not growing? I was supposed to be this 6'5" giant. What is going on? Why is this slow down all of a sudden? I'm having people catching up to me. They might outgrow me. Why is this happening? So I was obviously very upset at that. And in a really unfortunate manner, all of the other people that were in my band, all of a sudden they weren't growing too either. I mean, they all probably grew the same amount as I did. And also I need to emphasize this, guys, like I went out of my way to make sure that my height wouldn't be stunted. My dad told me that when he was 12, he was 5'9", 1.75 meters, and he was huge. He was in the same situation as me. He was huge. But because he started lifting heavy weights, the doctor told him that that was why his height was stunted, because he lifted heavy weights. So my dad, from the time that he was 12 until afterwards, only grew like an inch or two. By the time when I was 12, for the next few years, I wasn't growing too much either. And I was like, why? I haven't been lifting any weights. I've been getting exercise. I've been getting sleep. I've been drinking milk. I've done every single thing there is in the book to maintain the height growth. I stayed as far away as I possibly could from smoking, never touched a cigarette. But okay, let's stay optimistic here. These have just been a couple of years of slower growth. And this was also around the time that I got into modeling. So there I was with an agent which measured me, and I was at 182, a solid 6 foot in height. Even though my growth was stunted, I was still very tall, as I said. And I was talking to my agent, and my agent, she was saying stuff to me like, hey, you will still grow. It's not a problem. You should get to, at the very least, 6'4", maybe 6'3". So then here we are. This is another paper with my height. This was September 2018. How tall was I? I was 16 years of age. How tall was I? 6 foot. I was the same height that I was for 2 years. My height hadn't changed for almost 2 to 3 years at that point when I was 16. I was like, what? Something wrong with me? So that is when I was 16. Today I'm 17. One last chance for you guys to write down in the comments how tall you think that I am. Oh, by the way, I'm almost 18. So yeah, keep that in mind. I'm 18 in January, February, March. So I'm 18 in like 3 months, so keep that in mind. I'm like 17 in like 3/4 or something. So guess below how tall you think that I am now. So I am today 6'1" to 6'2". I don't know, between the two. So good news, I managed to grow a tiny little bit more, probably an inch or two. I don't know if I'm growing any longer. It doesn't feel like I've grown, but because measurements aren't always 100% specific, as you saw from those papers, I've done measurements before which have told me that I'm 6'1". I've done measurements before that told me that I'm over 6'2". So you can whatever you prefer, just put me within one of those two. I don't really mind. That's something that I wanted to get to as well. I don't really mind. Nowadays, it's not as big of a deal as it was before. Back then, to me, it hurt my pride so much. As somebody who throughout my whole life, I was absolutely huge. I was a giant of a kid. To then have my height stunted, or maybe not even stunted, and have all of these people who I was like taller than by like 2 to 3 inches, all of a sudden being like 6'4", 6'5". It didn't make any sense to me. And I do want to say, guys, like, I don't want to come off as like bad or anything. I'm still happy with the height that I am today. So then I came to the conclusion that, remember when I said that my dad, when he was 12, he was around 5'9", and he only grew 1 to 2 inches more. That is literally, basically what happened to me. So then I realized that the whole weightlifting thing was a lie that my dad was told by the doctors. I don't know if the doctor meant to lie or if the doctor was misinformed, but he was told something which wasn't true. And in return, I felt safe. I felt I'll be fine as long as I don't do weights. Now I go to the gym because obviously I'm over 16 and I feel like I've basically stopped growing anyway. But it was really interesting looking back and realizing that my dad's growth was just finished. It didn't get stunted by weights. It didn't get stunted by the gym. So that was like a real big realization that I had, and it was very interesting. In conclusion, don't get your hopes up too much. Be realistic, and I've learned from this to budget for the worst, to prepare for the worst. If anything happens, it was realistic for me to think that I was getting to 6'5" or 1.95 meters. It was very realistic for me to think that. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. So in my head, I should have also thought for the worst as well, not just the best, not just the best case scenario. And if there's anything that you guys can get out of this video is that be prepared. Don't just look at it from what's logical. Look at it from the worst case scenario and for the best case scenario, and take all of it into account. Today, naturally, height is a very much less important part of my life, but also in what I think is a very sad manner, height is now not as noticeable as it was before. I mean, back then when I was younger, 9 times out of 10, I would get people commenting about my height. Nowadays, it doesn't really happen too much because even though I am tall, I'm not way above average, if that makes sense. So every now and then people will mention it, but it might not be the first thing that they mention to me. Sometimes my voice is something that they mention, but not necessarily my height. But at the end of the day, I'm just grateful that I am above average. I'm grateful that I am healthy, because that is the most important thing. I'm grateful that all of my friends, everyone that I mentioned in this video, God bless you all, they're all healthy and they're all happy. So thank you guys so much for watching the video. If you made it this far into the video and you're not subscribed, please make sure to do so. Leave a comment and also follow me on Instagram so you can keep up with the things that I do day to day. Thank you so much. See you later. Bye.